Hello and welcome to this video in which we will review the conflict between India and Pakistan with the goal of understanding who really won the confrontation on the ground. But we will also have to analyze the narrative war, since we have been flooded with disinformation from both sides, with, incidentally, a collateral victim. French defense technologies, particularly the Rafale, have faced coordinated attacks from China, Russia, and even the United States. I'm also going to reveal to you some internal military documents that I managed to obtain, which will help us see things more clearly and to understand which of the belligerents suffered the greatest losses, but also why and how a Rafale was lost and how this event was amplified. Before we continue, a quick word from our partner Kony, thanks to whom we can make these videos. Would you like to be watched? Do you want companies or governments knowing everything about you, your income, health status, diet, friends, birthdays, clothing brands, and movie preferences? You wouldn't like that, yet we accept it every day with what we call data brokers. These are companies that collect information about us in a legal way. Our privacy is often violated by tracking our browsing and social media habits, and sometimes even by recording information through our cell phones without our knowledge. And they can even exploit database leaks against us, because all this information they will use it to be able to sell it. For instance, to alter our insurance price, loan interest rates, and product and service prices that we will look for on the internet, but also by selling our information to marketers. So phone harassment, intrusive ads, all of that, it's because of all those brokers. But you can actually make yourself disappear from them so they'll forget you with a Kony. Since signing up 2 years ago, they've removed me from over 200 databases, as the law permits us to have ourselves removed from such databases. We don't enforce it because we're unaware of the databases we're registered in. It's a time-consuming task that would have taken me countless hours. Follow the link in the video comments from incognicom/Tiddleman for a great discount to regain your freedom. You should never have had to give it up. Come on, let's get back to our topic. To fully understand the problem, we first need to review Operation Sindhur, which was originally carried out by India against two terrorist groups based in Pakistan who have already organized attacks in India in the past. So I can already see people commenting to claim that this is false. Except that former Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf admitted that his country's intelligence services had supported terrorist groups operating in India, including Ajmer and Taiba, who carried out the Mumbai attacks in 2008 and whose branch claimed responsibility for the attacks on tourists in Kashmir that left 26 dead on April 22nd, and which therefore provoked this response from India. So India launched a bombing campaign on Pakistani territory against terrorist sites. India reportedly warned Pakistan directly about upcoming operations to avoid escalation between the two nuclear-armed countries. I read that directly in internal documents from the Ministry of the Armed Forces, and this is also reported by the Indian press, where there are politicians who confirm this fact. I want to repeat this information because it's crucial. The Indian Army prepared a targeted bombing campaign on well-identified, well-defined sites, and it warned the country that was going to be attacked so that it wouldn't think the attack was directed against it. Indeed, India will rule out both options, which are usually implemented in such a situation. In other words, it will avoid Pakistani airspace by flying very low to conduct a secret mission. Simultaneously, it will avoid attacking Pakistani military infrastructure to prevent escalation. So we should still point out that this was, to say the least, a bold gamble on India's part. Because obviously they expect Pakistan to let them carry out their operations without interference, even though we're talking about conducting bombing operations on their territory. And on the night of May 6th to 7th, the Indians launched 60 to 70 aircraft, including Rafales assigned to bombing missions, and Sukhoi 30s, which were to provide air cover, and apparently some MiG-29s, which stayed further back in support. Pakistan, for its part, set up a real ambush against the Indian Air Force by positioning its air defenses along the border and scrambling about 40 fighter jets. Mainly Chinese J-10Cs and the Sino-Pakistani joint fighter, 17 but likely some F-16S too, and all of this is coordinated by the Saab 2000 radar aircraft, which it has also had for several years. And all of this leads to the biggest RR confrontation in modern history, from which only one thing can be remembered. India is said to have lost at least one Rafale. Both Pakistan and India are making announcements, with Pakistan claiming to have shot down 6 Indian fighters, including 3 Rafales. India acknowledges it's normal to lose aircraft in such a risky mission, even though they don't release any numbers, but there is still no evidence today that allows us to say that more than one plane was destroyed. We know that at least one Rafale was shot down. But it's even more complicated because a lot of archive footage or images generated by artificial intelligence have been shared. And by the way, Pakistan even shared video game footage on its official channels to try to support its claims of losses. This complexity makes analyzing information collected from open sources very challenging. What we do know for sure is that India can prove the successful targeting of 9 sites it wanted to hit on the first night, notably by using Scalp cruise missiles and hammer-guided bombs supplied by France and fired by the Rafale, as well as spice bombs launched by the Sukhoi 30. So what we know is that indeed all the targeted infrastructures have been proven to be destroyed. And Pakistan's response will be to claim that these were not terrorist sites. India killed 13 civilians, including 2 children, in the Bahawarpur mosque. Except that the Pakistani narrative will quickly collapse. First, it's not just a simple mosque, but a real complex. One of them shares satellite images of the site, revealing it has doubled in size since 2022, with the addition of military infrastructure, including guard posts. They will also point out that it is Pakistani land documents that prove the land was acquired by the terrorists' family, and that the site is actually managed by the nephew of the founder of the terrorist group, Jaish-e-Mohammed. There are also numerous records that prove the site supports a jihadist ideology that advocates for the conquest of India, with the regular presence of the founder's family once again. So it's still hard to claim that it was just a mosque with only civilians passing through who were killed. But the biggest communication mistake by Pakistan is that the leader of the terrorist group himself confirmed that about 10 members of his family, group members, were killed in the strike. This confirms the targeting's effectiveness. But in addition, they organized a burial ceremony directly in the city stadium in the presence of the terrorists identified as such. And especially with Pakistani officers, all of this with the country's flag on the coffins. So all of this obviously makes it difficult to support the idea that it was just... They're not terrorists, just people who happen to be at the mosque. And the fact of claiming that there are no terrorists in Pakistan, nor any link between the authorities and terrorist groups, while organizing this funeral with officials, obviously that doesn't hold up. So on this point, very clearly, India can be satisfied with the results it has achieved, even if there were certainly some collateral civilian casualties. But when the Pakistani Ministry of Defense was questioned before the National Assembly to find out the reasons for the ineffectiveness of their air defense, he said the air defense didn't fire to avoid revealing its position. So that's absolutely ridiculous, obviously, as an excuse, but in terms of targeting, in any case, the Pakistani storytelling is completely undermined. Pakistan claims to have shot down 5 or 6 Indian planes in the air domain. But on the ground, we could only prove 3 sites where debris was found. The first one is in Pampor, where images eventually showed that it was simply drop tanks like those used by Mirage 2000 or Rafale. They can get rid of them once they're empty, once they've finished their mission. The goal is to gain maneuverability. Finding this debris on the ground doesn't indicate a plane crash. And so, there are 2 images left. A piece of Rafale engine and a piece of debris with a French Mika missile attached to its wing. So we don't know the distance between these 2 shots, so they could correspond to either 1 or 2 planes. The identified debris from a Rafale confirms that at least 1 Rafale was shot down. So I refer you to the previous video I made on the channel to see a bit of the analysis of this piece. In any case, we have at least 1, possibly 2 planes that were reportedly shot down by the Pakistanis. So after this first night of fighting, Pakistan is going to hold a really excellent press conference with audio recordings. Exchanges between the Indian pilots support their statements, and they claim in particular that the Rafale's countermeasures were not able to defeat the Chinese PL-15 missile, which is fired by the J-10 fighter jets, except that some examples of this famous PL-15 missile were actually found completely intact. This indicates the targeted aircraft could defend themselves or cause the missile to malfunction, even managing to disable their self-destruct system. And the Indians are holding a press conference on their side, and they notably present debris from a Mirage, since the Pakistanis operate Mirage 3 and Mirage 5 aircraft. And these images are apparently new, so there were indeed exchanges of fire and destruction on both sides. Even though there is absolutely no evidence, no element that could support this theory of a loss on the Pakistani side, apart from the official Indian images. So we also have Indian activists who are going to create a video that was generated by artificial intelligence. This general announces the loss of 2 joint fighter, 17S. You can see the fake video and the original video here. That's why we have very exaggerated reports on both sides. It's because this false information, these fake images, were also picked up by the official press. After this initial aerial exchange, there were multiple campaigns of artillery fire and kamikaze drone attacks. Pakistan reportedly launched 300 to 400 drones at 36 Indian sites on May 8th. These are Asisgard Zengar drones, which are of Turkish origin. And the number is probably overestimated considering the debris found and the damage observed on the ground. Meanwhile, Indians are launching Israeli AROP and Polish WARMATE drones. However, drone exchanges will dominate the next 2 days. With mutual accusations of escalation and displaying debris without any real significant confirmed damage on the ground. But it's on May 10th that the tension will really rise when India accuses Pakistan of launching fatal ballistic missiles. And there are even debris that are actually found, and it's officially this attack that will lead to the return of the Indian Air Force. This time, with Scalp missiles launched by the Rafales, but also BrahMos missiles which are developed by India and Russia and are launched from Sukhoi 30 fighter jets. So the Chief of Staff of the Indian Army, he also stated on May 31st that they were able to understand the tactical mistake they had made, which had led to losing at least one aircraft on the first night of the attack. They fixed the issue, corrected it, and restarted operations by getting all their aircraft flying again. And that to carry out these long-distance strikes. So here they're really restarting an air campaign that's much more ambitious, with the return of fighter jets and a broader targeting scope, that is, across the entire Pakistani territory. And against military targets that are obviously much better defended than the simple terrorist installations that were targeted in the first phase. What we can prove through open source intelligence, that is, information from open sources, is that at least a dozen sites will be hit. With evidence of success through videos filmed on the ground directly by the Pakistani population, photos from Pakistani bases, like here at Shahbaz base, where you can see the F-16 hangar which is heavily damaged. Finally, satellite images show destroyed equipment, such as the Operations Cooperation and Coordination Center. There are craters in the middle of several airport runways. Underground bunkers, such as those at the Moraid base, are also targeted. Besides the infrastructure, there is also the airspace. The Indians claim to have destroyed several Pakistani planes, notably the Airborne Warning and Control System SAB 2000 radar plane, which holds particular importance. We know that their plane was actually destroyed thanks to the images that were shared. But there is also confirmation of this loss by a former Pakistani air marshal, that is, a 3-star general. The information is highly credible. The loss of this aircraft is a strategic blow for Pakistan. This aircraft detects enemy planes and can designate targets for missiles like AMRAAMs, which F-16S can fire. And alongside these losses of fighter jets, there are also, for example, Pakistani Bayraktar TB2 drones that are said to have been destroyed. We can see the base where they are housed. We will certainly probably never know the true extent of the damage that was caused to the infrastructure and the Pakistani aircraft. But in any case, this second Indian air campaign did not result in any further loss of fighter jets. And even Pakistan no longer claims any destruction of the aircraft that were used by India. The strikes, reaching over 300 km into Pakistan, had far more severe repercussions for the country. The effectiveness of the Chinese Honky 9 air defense system used by Pakistan is being questioned in this case. Especially since there are images that still haven't been confirmed, but that would show that at least one Honky 9 system was destroyed. That same evening, Pakistan launched strikes against 4 Indian air bases and 1 military site. By targeting the storage of BrahMos hypersonic missiles launched by the Sukhoi 30 and an S-400 air defense system of Russian origin, which the Indians acquired a few months ago. They achieved this using cruise missile, 400 AKG cruise missiles, which are launched by the Chinese-Pakistani joint fighter 17S shown in these images. However, the attack primarily consisted of basic drones once again. What we know today is that this Pakistani attack was originally supposed to be much more massive. The country's bases were hit by India just as their aircraft were preparing to take off, hindering the proper execution of the operations. And this information was revealed directly by the Pakistani Prime Minister himself on the 29th. Last May during the Lakhin summit in which Pakistan, Azerbaijan and Turkey gathered. And he even admitted that the Pakistani warning systems didn't even see the missiles coming. And this transparency is quite surprising when you consider the seriousness of this failure. Especially since one of the air bases that was hit was less than 2 kilometers away from the Pakistani nuclear missile stockpile. So it's really a complete failure indeed regarding the targets that were hit, but also concerning the credibility of Pakistani deterrence. Especially since, on top of all that, the claims of success made by Pakistan will quickly fall apart. because the Indian Prime Minister went directly to the base targeted by the Pakistanis to stand in front of the S-400 system and show that it was still intact. And as for the BrahMos missile storage facilities, there is no evidence that has been provided by Pakistan, not even in open sources. In any case, we can see that the military operation ends with a ceasefire. However, India achieved a highly favorable outcome by successfully striking numerous strategic targets deep within Pakistan. And all this while suffering little damage on its own soil and, as far as we know, losing only 1 or 2 planes. And in any case, a Rafale. And so, by the way, we can note that if the Indians had wanted to prove that the BS-001 plane, whose debris was found, was not shot down, they could have just taken photos with the plane to prove it was there. If there weren't any photos to begin with, that really confirms that the plane was indeed destroyed. The outcome for Pakistan is clearly much less impressive. They lost critical infrastructure, fighter jets, their most strategic radar aircraft, and several air bases are out of commission. Air defense failed to intercept most missiles, except a few ballistic ones, resulting in loss of life. 2 out of 300 kilometers in range, none of the Indian shots are said to have hit their target. And yet what most people remember from this war is that 1 or more Rafales were shot down. In other words, a communication war will be waged to divert attention from Pakistan's underperformance, and which will particularly target France. First for the Rafale, but then more broadly for all French military equipment. So, the narrative promoted by Pakistan and China, the Rafale was defeated by the J-10C and PL-15 missile duo. In this communication campaign, they will be supported by all enemies of the Rafale. For instance, they may assert that France required India to pull back its Rafale jets from battle following the casualties on day 1. They will then spread rumors like France not allowing India to freely configure the aircraft to suit their needs. And finally, there is a Russian newspaper, widely picked up afterwards, which claims that Indonesia cancelled its Rafale order following the aircraft's alleged underperformance in Pakistan. However, a document I possess today underscores the contrary. It emphasizes that the Indian defense attaché in Paris highlighted the effectiveness and relevance of French equipment. And not only that, Indonesia did not cancel its Rafale contract, but since the event, it has actually bought even more Rafales, as well as frigates, submarines and Caesar cannons. This clearly shows confidence in French equipment, contrary to the narrative they attempted to promote. Except for Pakistan, which is trying to push its narrative to pretend that they won a victory against India, and China, which on its side is trying to show its superiority in technical equipment. Actually, all the networks are going to get involved. In particular, we see the Iranians trying to spread the image of a bad aircraft, even though the United Arab Emirates bought 80 of them. Recalling that at the end of the previous year, they had released an artificial intelligence-generated video, a fake Al Jazeera video in which they announced the cancellation of the contract following the arrest in France of the founder of Telegram. Obviously it was fake, but also the United States, which largely pushed the event in countries where they themselves are trying to sell their own devices. Beginning with India's medium multi-role combat aircraft contract, which is expected to result in the sale of over 100 aircraft, and the Rafale, of course, is in the running. But we're also talking about Indonesia, where the United States hoped to win the second contract, which was actually won by the Rafale. Or even in Colombia, where the United States has already blocked the supply of engines to prevent the country from choosing the Swedish Gripen fighter jets, and where they are now trying to discredit the Rafale. So then, obviously, we always find Russia, which is simply trying to regain the positions it may have lost in Indonesia and Egypt. The countries that originally purchased the Sukhoi 35 later cancelled their contracts. From the moment Russia no longer had access to spare parts, especially those supplied by France. And so, their Sukhoi 35 was no longer at the quality they wanted, so they abandoned the aircraft to switch to the Rafale. And then India, which was still the main buyer of equipment exported by Russia, and where they are trying to regain their position. But unfortunately for the Russians, the Sukhoi 57 already has problems, which, let me remind you, the Indians themselves said that the aircraft would never meet the needs of the Indians, and that's why they turned instead to the Rafale. Especially since you have a former advisor to Indian defense who outright stated that Russian technology was no longer at the level needed to meet India's requirements. And besides, you can clearly see that the Indians don't hesitate to share the results of air combat training, where the Rafale systematically beats the Sukhoi 30, even though the Sukhoi 30 is normally dedicated to the country's air defense. And the Russians even offered another option by trying to sell POLF 160M strategic bombers to India at the end of last year. Unfortunately, Ukraine targeted and damaged the factory 2 months after this proposal. In short, as you can see, not only is India satisfied with the Rafale, but they're making it known. They acknowledge that the initial loss was indeed due to a planning error on their part, and that they were able to correct this initial usage mistake. The analysis of the Chinese PL-15 missiles that were recovered intact by India, mainly thanks to the effectiveness of the Rafale's own defense system. This will allow India to further reduce the effectiveness of the PL-15, especially since France and Japan will likely be involved in the analysis of the PL-15, once again to improve the countermeasures used by our aircraft. So overall, I think it's very clear that India did not win the communication war. It did not shine in this area, unlike Pakistan. At first, Pakistan overexploited this one-time success of shooting down a plane to try to make all their past failures disappear and be forgotten. And so, the Rafale is a collateral victim of Pakistan's desire to try to impose a different narrative than that of the losses they have suffered. And on the other hand, India won, notably thanks to the Rafale, which is its spearhead, and whose fleet will be further strengthened with the arrival of the naval version that will equip its aircraft carriers. And why not soon, with even deeper cooperation with that famous big contract that might be coming? But above all, the creation of a local assembly line for the Rafale, since in France the line is already saturated and we can't create a second one. And that would also make it possible to meet the needs of other countries, future buyers of the Rafale. And here I have signs, prospects that are relatively encouraging, and we'll see that in the coming months, but you'll see the Rafale, contrary to what the Chinese and others have tried to claim. It's a shining plane that keeps winning contracts and has a bright future with further developments. The Standard 5, the combat drones that will accompany it, and it will be relevant at least until 2060 or 2070 in combination, of course, with the SKF starting from 2045. But it's an aircraft with a great future ahead. The Chinese J-10 aircraft and PL-15 missiles won't overshadow it. I hope you liked this video. See you soon.